What should you know about the latest wide receiver rankings and half-point PPR? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Training camps are revving up all across the NFL. We're getting some news and notes. We'll look at that here as we get into later in the week and break that down for you, catch you up on what's happened early in camps. We are, however, getting through a list of rankings updates that we have to get to. We've crossed off the quarterbacks and running backs. We're going to look at the wide receivers. We're going to look at the half-point PPR consensus expert rankings on Fantasy Pros, who's ranked too high, who's too low, to get the finger on the pulse of what the industry is thinking and what you should be thinking for your fantasy football drafts coming up. So we will check in there. We'll keep doing these updates here for you periodically to just keep tabs on what's going on, and there may be some guys rising and falling. We'll say who are too low or too high right now, and we'll get into that here on the show. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. All right, let's dive right into the top tier and the top group of wide receivers. We'll go through the top 12 first. These are the wide receiver ones in most leagues here. Justin Jefferson, no surprise, is number one. And we agree with that. I mean, he's been most consistent. He's been durable. He's in his prime. And he's in a great situation here. Adam Thielen is gone. Jordan Addison still getting his feet wet as a rookie first-round receiver. He's going to dominate targets there, drop off to T.J. Hawkinson at tight end after him. So Kirk Cousins is going to butter his bread in the right place, and Jefferson is that guy. So we agree with that. I think Jamar Chase, a little bit of a slide last year. A lot of defenses keyed on him after his big rookie season, but he's two on the list, and this makes a lot of sense. I expect a big year for Chase here in a Jefferson-type mode. They figured out how to move around Chase really well and get those big plays after the catch, put him in the slot. Joe Burrow is going to find him. So two LSU receivers right at the top, Jefferson and Chase. I think those are the safest guys you could look at, high ceiling as well as high floor with what you're looking at. And next guy is Cooper Kupp. I think he's going to rebound big time. There's not a lot in that Rams offense. He was the wide receiver one half-point PPR in terms of average scoring before he got hurt last year. So you can make an argument that he belongs over Chase, but it's about right here when you look at this top three. Tyreek Hill comes in at 4. It's going to be hard to duplicate that big yardage show from last year. He did cool off. He was on pace for 2,000. He says he's going to chase it again, but it's going to be hard to get there regardless. So I think you just look at Tyreek Hill being an overall top 5 guy that's going to dominate. Stephon Diggs, I think there might be even a greater separation there with the targets that get distributed to other Bills receivers. So Diggs, yeah, that's a solid spot for him. CeeDee Lamb, it's a great situation now with Brandon Cooks as your number 2 in Dallas. He's taken over as the clear number 1. His talent is really manifesting here. And Dak Prescott getting a fully healthy him, plus the targeting of him beyond being just the number 1 wide receiver. There are some questions at tight end as they move on from Dalton Schultz. So CeeDee Lamb should dominate targets there. So that's a pretty strong top half, top 6 there when you're looking at wide receiver ones. A.J. Brown, look, I don't know if the separation is there between him and Devontae Smith as big as we think, but you know he's going to get it done and have some big games, and that's what we like about him. Now, Devontae Adams, interesting that he's dropped down to number 7. There's a case that he could go higher because of his touchdown production, but I think you also look at the changing offense, right? Jimmy Garoppolo's in there, so it's a new quarterback. It's not the chemistry he had with either Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr, so that's a fair spot to put it in. Maybe you could argue that Adams could go over Brown and Lamb a few spots earlier, but again, no lower than this for Adams. Amon-Ra St. Brown is interesting. He is the Lions' go-to receiver. There are some questions with the other receivers. I think he's helped by the fact that Jameson Williams has the suspension early, so that's going to put him in a big go-to role here. And you also don't have Hawkinson anymore. They're working in other tight ends. At some point, Sam Laporta, the rookie, will have some value, but St. Brown is the guy all over the field here for Jared Goff, much like it was for him and Cooper Kupp in LA. Garrett Wilson, I think you have to put here as well. So these rankings are pretty solid early because Wilson, again, gets Aaron Rodgers. We know he's very productive as a high-end wide receiver too, even with a mix of quarterbacks there. So really good situation. Jalen Waddle, yeah, I think it was a career year in terms of the volume off Tyreek Hill. You can't really put him too high with Hill. Look, they're going to be the two receivers that get the most looks here. Easy. There's not a lot of other targets here. They eliminated Mike Gesicki from the equation. Not a lot of receivers to give them depth. Cedric Wilson is not really a threat there, but Waddle, again, pretty high floor. I don't know if his ceiling is nearly as high as Tyreek Hill, but looking at the production and the volume, we have to put him there. And Chris Olave, this may surprise you a little bit, in the top 12. Two Ohio State second-year receivers joining Garrett Wilson. Look, Derek Carr likes to feed one guy. We've seen it with Darren Waller. We've seen it with Devontae Adams. He likes to have one target that he looks at. Specifically, there's not a lot there in New Orleans, right? They moved on from Marquez Callaway. It's really a drop-off. You have Rashid Shaheed. They don't have Jarvis Landry anymore. So really, you're looking at Olave having to be very important here to this offense overall. I think the Saints defense, having a little bit of regression, will create more passing volume for Carr, and a lot of that is going to funnel through Olave. Keep in mind, they also not necessarily surefire tight end with Juwan Johnson and beyond that. So, again, Olave, again, you look at the disparity. Sometimes you want to have just enough weapons to get that diversity of the coverage off that player, but you also want them in a position to dominate targets. So these are all players who are going to do that. Interesting, we still have two Dolphins that make the cut, but really these are the best number ones. And really, you want to shoot as much as possible to get one of these guys. So I can't argue too much for the way the pecking order is here. You can't guarantee who's going to be the top scorer here, but I'll feel great about having any of these guys early in my lineups here in fantasy football. So can't go wrong with that. And we really like having one of these top receivers, and more of an argument to say target receivers first, maybe come away with two of these guys. And now you're really in business here in fantasy football. All right, we will get to the next here, a little bit more controversy maybe, and rankings disparity that we'll look at. But yeah, I love the way the rankings are early here. And again, it's hard to separate those guys, but clearly a decent pecking order we have from the experts in 2023. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, we've all had some challenges in our life, and sometimes we need a way back to find our direction. And really, I can't say enough about therapy and what it can do for you. It's done a lot for me, just to get me back on track. When things are a little bit veering off here, we can find our way, and we sometimes need someone to get us there. Really, therapy has been a lifesaver for me and a game changer. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try, because it's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule and needs. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. You'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So you'll find the right fit no matter what for you. It really is something that can be transcended, and just talking to someone, working things out, getting a Sherpa and guide through it all, this challenging thing called life. And sometimes we get lost, but that's why we need a little bit of GPS and navigation. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp, HELP, BetterHelp.com/lockedon. All right, it is time to continue the show and break down the wide receiver rankings. We went through the top 12 here, the wide receiver ones at 12 team leagues in half-point PPR, according to the expert consensus on Fantasy Pros. At 13 is T. Higgins, so now we get some second receivers. Higgins may be playing for a contract elsewhere. I don't know if they're going to be able to afford him and Joe Burrow, so something to watch out for there. But Higgins was very productive right near Chase last year, so good there. Then you get your second Eagle as well, Devonta Smith. Yeah, I think that's fair. DK Metcalf, pretty aggressive ranking here at number 15. I think maybe drop him a little bit. I think there's been a major drop off with Tyler Lockett in the rankings, which is a bit surprising when they're right next to each other. I think, look, Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to cut into both those guys' roles here just because they have a legitimate third receiver, right? I mean, they took a first-round pick and used it on a third receiver that we haven't seen the Seahawks do in quite some time. They haven't had an array of three receivers like this in a long time. So when you look at that, Metcalf is going to be affected by that too, because Smith-Njigba can line up all over the place, outside and inside. So I'm going to slide him down. Amari Cooper, up and down to me. This is kind of the buyer beware version. Yeah, I think there's some guys with upside that we're looking at after. So Cooper was pretty good, we know, with Deshaun Watson, and got it done with Jacoby Brissett as well. But Cooper, again, pretty steady, but he can disappear in games, as we've seen, and maybe a little bit of fade. It's been a few years. Keenan Allen, I'm going to avoid here as much as I can. He's got the injury issues, getting a little bit older. Things that could drop off sharply. That's why they drafted Quentin Johnson in the first round. So a little bit buyer beware there. And Deebo Samuel, I'm not sure you're getting that much of value here because, again, he's not running and getting those scores as much with McCaffrey. McCaffrey's cutting into some of his receiving. Brandon Ayuk is doing some things. So this group here, I think, buyer beware, Metcalf, Cooper, Allen, Deebo, I would drop them. And here's why. There's some people behind them that I really like, including Calvin Ridley. I think you look at Ridley, he's going to dominate targets here. I know Christian Kirk and Zay Jones are there with the Jaguars, but Ridley, let's remember, he was a top 5 wide receiver before he had that issue of sitting out from the Falcons and that suspension. I mean, he's that good of a player, and he's got a red zone ability as well to rack up the touchdown. So I'm going up with Ridley quite a bit. I want to maybe be aggressive in drafting him. I think I'll also be aggressive in drafting DJ Moore. Now, you look at the quarterbacks DJ Moore has had, it's been questionable, but you look at Justin Fields. I mean, this guy is going to feed DJ Moore quite a bit. There's not a lot of wide receiver. You look at Darnell Mooney. Okay, fine. There's some talent in him, but he's meant to be kind of a number 2 or number 3 guy. But you look at DJ Moore, he's an alpha. He's going to command the ball. We really like that pickup. So that's a good one. Jerry Jeudy, I'm a little torn on, but he is playing for a contract. Looked like they could phase him out with Marvin Mims next year in Denver. They did pay Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton. I'm sure they regret that now because Patrick got hurt last year. Sutton is still fading a little bit. But I think we were so focused on Wilson and Sutton. I think Wilson and Jeudy will have the better rebound here in the Sean Payton, Joe Lombardi offense. Terry McLaurin is good, but again, I wouldn't go banging the table for him necessarily with Jahan Dotson in the mix, and not sure what we're going to get from Sam Howell. Drake London, again, not sure what we're going to get from Desmond Ridder and the transition from Marcus Mariota. So a little bit of buyer beware again. And we look at Christian Watson. I think it's a guy that I would lift up as well. I mean, Jordan Love is going to feed him. Watson is just getting started here with his receiving talents. Romeo Doubs is a distant second here. So again, I think maybe a little bit afraid of the situations with Ridley, DJ Moore, and Watson. But these are 3 guys that I really like targeting if you can't get Higgins and Devonta Smith here in this group for sure. So interesting, right? Maybe a little bit of going with the safe, what we know picks versus what we don't know. I would go with more what we don't know. That's where you can get the value, right? People are a little bit scared of that. And you just have to look and be confident and say, look, the numbers are there to support as well as the talent to say these guys are going to outdo where they're picked. So take advantage of that value. People are jumping on guys that are maybe not as productive just because of their name recognition. That's okay. We can go in a different direction and still get the desired results. All right, there's a look at now your top 24, according to Fantasy Pros, where we like them, maybe reshuffling, especially those wide receiver 2s here in 2023. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today, every dayers, you know who you are. Thanks for supporting us and checking us out every weekday here to get the fantasy football insight you need pre-draft or all season long to help you dominate your league. So really appreciate you. That means we'll come back. If you missed the quarterbacks or running back rankings breakdown here on where people are going, what people are thinking, check those out. We will finish this mini series here with a look at tight ends there, and then we'll get you caught up with some training camp news and notes on Friday's show. All right, it is time to end the show on this one and look at the wide receivers in the 25 to 36 range and beyond there as we try to find the best wide receiver 3 values. Chris Godwin's up next. I think this is fair for Godwin. We just don't know where we're going to get from Baker Mayfield. And this is a big fear here, but I don't understand Mike Evans kind of being buried well there, like at 34. So, yeah, Mike Evans is at 34. I'd never thought I'd see that in fantasy, but that's how much we're worried about Baker Mayfield. I think Evans, I would still look at a little bit more than Godwin because Evans is a big playmaker. I just don't know what you're going to get from these receivers, but there's a necessary fade there with the Bucs because I just do not trust Mayfield. But again, one of these guys is going to outscore their production easily. Tyler Lockett, look, I think it's fair to drop him down, but Metcalf should have been dropped off. Accordingly, I think it's a little aggressive for DeAndre Hopkins to be at 27. I know he's can dominate targets to the Titans, but it's a low-volume passing game. Brandon Ayuk, maybe a little bit undervalued the next. Kirk, I think there has to be a little bit more separation between him and Ridley. Ridley's going to dominate a lot of his slot time as well because he can do that. So Kirk is going to be a valuable receiver, but you might see Kirk more dedicated in the slot. And again, you're just going to have a drop-off there when you add an alpha. Mike Williams, again, another Charger I might avoid a little bit. I might look at Quentin Johnson for value there versus Keenan Allen. Michael Pittman, he's been holding steady here, but I think I'm worried, again, Anthony Richardson in this offense, will they use more of Alec Pierce? Pittman was just disappointing last year overall. We thought he was really going to click with Matt Ryan. So not there. Deontay Johnson, I think the arrow points up. Kenny Pickett's going to feed him better. Johnson, by the metric, should have had a much better year last year. I think he'll materialize. Marquise Brown, helped by Hopkins leaving. I think I would look at Marquise Brown with Kyler Murray or whoever's a quarterback, Colt McCoy, early in the season than Nuke. So Hollywood over Nuke here just because of the situation where Hopkins is a lower volume passing team. There's not a lot there for Hollywood Brown. Behind him is Rondell Moore. So I do like Brown at that value. Again, Evans or Godwin, one of them is going to really outperform their expectations. We have to just see how it plays out. Mayfield, Jahan Dotson, again, maybe a better value overall at 35 that you look at and then banging the table for Terry McLaurin a little bit earlier. Treylon Burks, you really have to drop him off. I think he's off my list here. With Hopkins, I'm sure that'll adjust itself a little bit. Now, some players that I like that should maybe get more top 36 consideration. So I would maybe drop out of this list to get Kirk out of there, maybe not Pittman, not Williams. I would also look at fading Burks and maybe even Hopkins here. But I look at some of the guys after George Pickens. It's going to be hard to sustain 2 Steelers receivers, but watch out for Kenny Pickett there. Jordan Addison, I'm going to fade. This is some off-field stuff. And again, they have Hawkinson as the second target first. And don't forget about KJ Osborne there behind Jefferson. Kadarius Toney being undervalued here. Look, he's the guy after Travis Kelce. So let's keep that in mind. They did lose Juju Smith-Schuster, reorganizing some things. I think they're going to prefer Toney over Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Sky Moore as being key target. Again, if Jackson Smith-Njigba is down here in the top 40, I think, again, you have to really cut in more into Metcalf and Lockett. Brandon Cooks has been productive everywhere he goes, but I'm not sure how it's going to play out here as the kind of the third or 2B receiver in Dallas. So we'll see Brandon Cooks if he has something left there. And a couple of other players we're looking at. I mean, look at Cortland Sutton, maybe go after him a little bit, but I'm not going to have too many shares of him. You look at Rashad Bateman. Again, it's hard to trust any Ravens receiver, especially with Odell Beckham Jr. Zay Flowers. I might be most interested in Flowers as a sleeper here. We have Gabe Davis. We can look at Corey Davis, all kinds of options here. But again, I think there are so many guys that you look at this range that I think it's going to be not a maybe bang the table rush into the third wide receiver. I think you're going to wait a little bit. There's just too many values here. So I think you try your best to maybe get 2 of those top 12. And then if I'm going for the upside play, I look for Higgins, Smith, that's a T, and Devonta, or then look at Ridley, Moore, and Jeudy, or Watson, and then go down to finding some values here as a wide receiver 3. So, again, a lot of influx. We'll find out more in training camp in the preseason. But, again, go to the upside. Go with the guys in new places. Again, you're always going to get a better value on them than some guys that are going to be in the status quo consensus here for sure. So, a lot of good stuff to look at the wide receivers. But, again, my arrow's pointing up for the younger targets in volume passing game and the older targets that are going to just dominate targets as a clear number 1. So really like those options. And I don't want to get too deep. I mean, it's a little bit of a cluster when you get to those wide receiver 3s. So again, I would be more interested in investing highly early at this position because I think I can find some better values at quarterback and tight end in relation here this season. And running back, a lot of attrition is going to play out there. But wide receiver, look, with all due respect to running back, I think wide receiver is now the premier position in fantasy football because if you got 3 that can finish in the top 20, you're in business every single week, and love that for sure. So the best position to target here early is definitely wide receiver in 2023. There you have it. There's a look at our latest rankings update here on Locked On Fantasy Football. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Check you out on the next show as we break down the tight ends.